Today, we welcome Jonathan Salem Baskin, co-author of Tell the Truth. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Ward, and hello, everybody.
Just a little introduction on Jonathan. Jonathan is president of Baskin Associates, and his experience totals nearly 30 years of work driving consumer purchases and building strong brands. He has worked for global brand names including Apple, Blockbuster, Limited, and Nissan, amongst many others. Jonathan likes to research, to think, to talk, and to put into action novel ideas on how to make marketing more reliable, sustainable, and profitable. Welcome again, Jonathan. This introduction, is this fine for you, or do you want something to add?
Only that I might have 30 years of experience, but I started working professionally when I was still in grade school.
Okay. An early starter.
Yeah.
That's good. But so today we want to talk about your latest book, Tell the Truth. This is the book for the people who haven't seen it, not yet. This is Tell the Truth, with a subtitle, Honesty is Your Most Powerful Marketing Tool. So we want to talk with Jonathan about his latest book. But just before we start, I just want to say that we want this webinar to be interactive. So please, viewers, listeners, we are waiting your questions. Jonathan is very eager to answer all your questions. There's a little chat box in Ustream where you can post your questions. So please do so, and we will get them straight away into our webinar. Okay. So Jonathan, maybe just to start with, Tell the Truth. When I saw the title, I was thinking, okay, I think I'm telling the truth. But you wrote the whole book about it, so please explain a little bit the context behind it. I've read the book now, of course, but I want you to explain a bit more about the idea and the concept of the book.
Sure, and thank you, Ward. Yeah, two things I want to talk about right up front. The first is how we came about writing it, and then secondly, what the relevance of the meaning of what we found in terms of truth. First, the why we wrote it. Sue Unerman is my co-author, and she's the chief strategist for WPP's MediaCom office in London, and they buy a third or a half of all the media in the UK. And we met a couple of years ago and just had a great back and forth intellectually and personally. And one of the things we wanted to really understand was why new media and why new ideas seem to be replacing old ideas about communicating and marketing that had worked so well for so long. We're fascinated by and enjoy all the conversational and other digital applications for communications that we were using and our clients were using, but we were wondering what was really going on here. Were we really getting at the heart of not only why those media work or don't upon occasion, and perhaps in doing so coming to terms with why perhaps other media, whether they were analog, billboards, broadcast television, why they did or didn't work. And our supposition in going into this research project was, are there some common reasons why all marketing in any channel either works or doesn't? Could we find some truths that brands could apply to their entire portfolio of communication strategies? And so that kicked off this project. And truthfully, it didn't start out with a focus on truth necessarily. It really was a research project to find out what the hell was going on. So we looked at hundreds of companies over the course of about 18 months, almost 2 years, and we interviewed 50 for the book. So there are 50 case histories in the book. And what we came up with was this sort of, and it's a funny word because I wish I could remember the exact moment this occurred to us. It would probably be a wonderfully dramatic or anecdotal story to tell, but at some point in this process, I remember we were talking about this, and one of us said to the other, you know, when we're talking about engagement, when we're talking about interactivity or participation or involvement or meaning or storytelling, all these other terms, transparency, authenticity, what we were really talking about was truth, and whether or not that the relationship between the brand and the consumer or the customer, whether we're talking B2B or B2C, was ultimately truthful, that they actually understood the truths about one another, and therefore and thereby built sustainable, profitable, reliable relationships. And once we got the idea of truth in our heads, we started looking for it. We chanced upon really a funny challenge, which was, like you said, Ward, well, we all tell the truth. It's one, legally we're required to tell the truth. But secondarily, truth actually is really, it's a point of view. Truth is dependent on the listener or the viewer. Truth is a slice of truth. Truth is something you can embellish. And what we concluded was that we marketing folks, we liberal arts people, are too smart for our own good. And by not actually putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is truthful and this isn't, we were actually doing our brands and our businesses a disservice. Because ultimately, new media, if anything else, as a P2P tool, means that customers and consumers are going to find out the truths. So better that we as businesses start to define what truth is and deliver it, and thereby sort of be anticipating what is going to be this peer-to-peer revolution that has only begun. So the book is the result of our research project and our actual techniques for delivering truthful communications. And we said, let's stop having a philosophical conversation about truth. We all did that in college over beers. Let's actually figure out how to turn it into a business strategy. And that's where we came up with the 50 cases and the 8 ways, foreign context and foreign content, that you can deliver truth. I know I told you too much, but that's how we got to the book.
Thanks for the explanation. But so truth, what you're saying, is more close to honesty, I assume. So it's very close to honesty. And what about authenticity? Is there a difference for you between those two, or is it all of it in the same area?
Yeah, it's one of those, like in mathematics, there's a phrase that all squares are rhombuses, but not all rhombuses are squares. And truth has a funny relationship with words like authenticity and even honesty, in that you can be authentically untruthful and you can be honestly wrong. So truth to us is actually a meta idea that we should talk about more and more explicitly versus just talking about transparency or even honesty. Because again, ultimately, the world is not necessarily asking for the brands to be transparent as much as it's asking them to be truthful in whatever they do choose to share, so that it's not just marketing hype, it's not spin, it's not a slice of the truth, it is the truth. So, this idea of radical transparency is another one of these sort of glib ideas that we've looked at, and I've struggled with, over the years. And we're seeing this in Hollywood already, where fans are actually saying to some of the stars, "Stop tweeting so much. I actually don't want to be that transparent. I don't want to know that much about you. But what I do want to know is whatever it is you're telling me is reliably true." Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But just maybe because you're talking about 50 examples in the book, maybe is there just one out of your head that you say, look, this is really the best case that we had in our book about truthful communication and being truthful as a brand? Is there just one? Because there's several ones, of course, but...
Yeah. Well, and I'll give you 2, and I'll give you more if we want. I mean, truthfully, and I'll stop chuckling every time I say truthfully in reference to this book. There are a whole bunch of other cases that didn't get into it, so I'm thinking we should probably have one of those sort of like DVDs with the extra content type things. The neat thing about truth is that it's a tactic. It's a really small idea in terms of how you execute communications. And truth is also a very big sort of uber meta idea that you use in terms of how you approach your brand and how you define it. So first, the little example. There are billboards in America for a fast food chain called Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A was the first chicken fast food chain. And by the way, and has a whole bunch of other problems on the communications front. But in terms of this one tactic, they had a limited marketing budget. And instead of going down the path that most fast food marketers do, which is trying to, those fake table sets with, the happy people, eating the food and grinning and laughing because the fast food is making them happy and they're enjoying it and they're being healthy and all this sort of nonsense that is all sort of truthful. What they've been doing now for years is they've been running these giant billboards on the sides of the freeways. The billboards are painted by cows, and there's a 3-dimensional cow next to the billboard with a paintbrush in its paw, or whatever the hell cows have, hoof. And improperly spelled on the billboard are the words, "Eat more chicken." And at first blush, it's crazy, whether or not you like the creative. It's hilarious because, we know that cows can't spell, and we know that they don't paint billboards. So it's a total artifice. It's a make-believe thing. But the premise that the future hamburger would prefer that we eat a future chicken burger instead is an absolutely truthful idea. We don't have to debate it. We don't have to wonder, well, what would the cow think if it were depressed? Or it's an immediate, you get it immediately. Similarly, on the tactical front, there's a series of TV commercials here in the States for Tums, which is an antacid. And again, instead of setting up a long, convoluted presentation trying to make a point about this antacid, visually it's very simple. People bring food up to their mouths, and as they're trying to eat it, the food slaps their faces, and they can't get the food into their mouths. And the slogan comes on the screen, and I may not be remembering correctly or exactly. It says something like, "When your food fights you, fight back." Again, it's the truth of these moments, these expressions of a brand attribute are immediate. We get it. We don't have to debate it. We don't have to, truthfully, we don't have to believe it. It just is. And so there are other tactical ways to approach it, but from just a everyday experience type approach, there are ways to make how we communicate far more truthful. On a broader front, the example I probably choose to use is for Roomba, which is a automatic vacuum cleaner. These are these little robots that they look kind of like a flying saucer, and they actually work. My aged parents have one, and it works marvelously, and it vacuums your floor automatically. A while ago, some enterprising hackers were taking them apart and reprogramming them to play soccer or football, or attaching flamethrowers and hatchets to the tops of them so they could do death bot battles. About the same time, some hackers were customizing their Xbox 360 consoles to do things like control the lighting in their homes. Interesting dichotomy of what happened in these two instances. From the Microsoft perspective, what they did was, of course, issue restraining orders and complain that these people were improperly using their Xboxes, and, oh, by the way, notifying them that their warranties were void because they'd opened up the boxes. Roomba published the schematics and said, go to it, customize it further. If you think about it, why are iPhones so popular? It's because no two are the same. They are ultimately customizable. So there is no proper, formal, official way to use an iPhone. It's however you choose to use it. And this idea of DIY and of customization of brands goes a step further than just saying that we consumers own the ideas of our brands or own the marketing artifice of them, and actually getting at the truth of the relationship, which is we own the thing we bought. We own the jar of shampoo that we choose to leave in our hair for 45 seconds longer than it says on the bottle after in the shower because we've decided it works for us. So one way that brands on a strategic level can get at truth is to acknowledge that user customization and that user ownership of the products. Stop talking about, again, the ideas of the brand and be more focused on how do they enable the actual experience and adoption of those products and services so they are truly customized and owned. So those are just a couple for instances, but again, the book is chock full of them.
Yeah, I know, that's very interesting. Just another thing, Jonathan, also in relation to being truthful. In your book, you're talking on several places and instances about humor as a communication vehicle. Especially, I remember in the beginning of the book, you have the Southwest Airlines. That's one that you, I think, particularly like. But I think that you don't like that much, or not so much in favor of using humor in communications. Am I right in this? Or maybe can you explore this a bit? Because I know a lot of marketers, advertising people, they use humor. So I think that's a very interesting point, and I want you to elaborate a bit on that one if you can.
Yeah, I love humor, and I love actually really bad humor. I have a sort of a Three Stooges type enjoyment of slapstick humor. So. But again, when we talk about brand or we talk about truth, or even just brand attributes just overall, humor is a very hard thing to own. In other words, it's very hard for brand A to be funnier than brand B. Humor is a language. Humor is a medium, if you will, for communicating, but it's not something you own any more than sexy. I just leaf through a women's fashion magazine even now, and look at how many different brands and how many different women's accessory categories are trying to own sexy. And the punchline is they can't. It's not a differentiator whatsoever. So I love humor, but I think we misuse it as marketers because we use it as a stand-in almost a substitute for what we should really be trying to do, which is find ways to communicate those brand truths. And if humor works in communicating those truths, it's a great vehicle, but it's nothing more than a vessel. It's a medium for communicating that. And the Southwest example is a great one, which is the truth of one of the core truths of airline travel in this day and age is that it's horrible. I mean, it's a fact of life. Flying on an airplane sucks. We all know it. So it's no secret. Nobody's hiding it. So what Southwest has done brilliantly for years is acknowledges that without overtly saying flying is horrible, but by their creative use of humor, not only in their adverts and in their canned media, but in their experiential marketing when you're actually on a plane or in a waiting area, which is Southwest is able to effectively say, we're laughing with you because this is surreal and insane. And we get it. We know you get it. So let's live through this together. And I don't know. I don't know if Ryanair or any of the other low-rate airlines operating in Europe do something similar, but I got to tell you, getting on a Southwest plane is a breath of fresh air, even though the service doesn't exist. You know, the seats are schmunky together. It's still bumpy because they fly through the same storms, but they use humor to address a real truth. So in the end of the day, it's not a funnier brand. It's a more truthful brand.
So in a way, they are relativating themselves. Is it that what you mean with humor, that you just don't use it as a means, as yeah, how would I say that? Are people hiding too much with humor, or what is the point about?
It just we marketers are just too good. We're too smart for our own good. We think we are able to weave these convoluted, funny things because, again, our goal is to engage. Our goal is to get people to participate. Our goal is to get the viewer to click and forward our humorous content to someone else so they can watch it. And it's sort of one of these things, I think, in American English, it's called a perpetual motion machine, which is this idea that if you start something running, it will just keep itself running endlessly. And it's a physical impossibility. The laws of physics don't allow it. At some point, it will run down. It will slow down. And I think similarly, what we will not think, I know, what Sue and I found when we researched the book was a lot of marketers use humor or sex to become the, if you will, the end of the marketing communication versus simply the mechanism or the means. And we can all, and it's funny, we used to play a game at home years ago. My family and our daughter was far younger, and we'd watch a commercial and we'd try to guess what they were marketing. And sometimes it took the full 30 seconds. There are viral videos out today that are hilariously funny, that have nothing, it could be for floor polish, it could be for a car company, it could be for insurance, it could be for, who knows? So the challenge for us is to, again, acknowledge and talk in these terms of what is truthful. How do we develop this truthful relationship with our customers? So and by the way, and not to belabor a point, but another outcome of this truthful approach is that when your customers understand the truth of your experience and the truth of your brand, that's what makes them loyal. And that's what makes them far more likely to stay loyal when something goes wrong. When you think about how many times people are disappointed in their brand experience or how fickle and quick they are to complain on Twitter or someplace else as soon as the brand falls short, just even the teeniest bit in terms of how it provides its brand experience, that's because at the heart of that relationship, there's not been a matching of what the truth is. Southwest does a great job because what they're doing through using humor as well as just their overall communications, what they're doing is they're telling the customer, here are your expectations. They should be about here. And just so you understand, we'll laugh with you, but here are the expectations. So you got it? And therefore, the experience actually, it meets the expectation versus making these crazy promises. You know, I don't mean to diss brands, but there's this Heineken global campaign now with this guy that walks through the house and is this brilliant, James Bond guy, and he walks into a party in a dinner jacket and he fences with somebody and then he kisses the beautiful girl and then he juggles and then he cures cancer and then he, discovers alien life and blah, blah, and then he, plays in the band and then he drinks a Heineken at the end of it. And I'm thinking to myself, one, what is that telling anybody about Heineken? And all it tells them is that they hired a smart ad agency. But more importantly, what is it doing in terms of setting my expectation for drinking a bottle of beer? I got to tell you, if they could promise that will happen if I drink Heineken, they have got me as a lifelong customer, no ifs, ands, or buts. But I have a suspicion that's not the truth.
Okay, thank you. Talking about truth again, and I think you already touched a bit upon that, because there's also saying like everyone has his own truth. So there's not really a truth, because everyone has his interpretation of the truth, and perception is reality. How does this relate to your story about a brand that has to tell the truth?
Yeah, it's again, it's an excuse for lazy philosophizing and lazy marketing. There is truth. We know in our lives, in our personal lives. Imagine if you talk that way to your wife or to your husband or to your lover or to your friends, and that they were offended or concerned about something, and you shrugged and said, "Well, that's your truth." You get punched in the nose. But when we're talking with our corporate marketing hats on, yeah, it's in the eye of the beholder. It's, it's true. So, oil companies can take that 1.00001% of what they spend on alternative energy, which is usually to buy businesses that are developing it and then shut them down. And they can expand that and say, we're having a conversation with humanity about the energy future, and we believe that it involves alternative energy. That's not true. It is this much true, but we all know, they all know, that's not the truth. And the far greater challenge and opportunity for a business, for the oil industry, for instance, would be to say, how do we creatively tell people the truth? Let them know that we actually need this stuff, and that it's actually a good trade-off, and that we are good people. The challenge would be to tell folks the truth and do it creatively and persuasively versus avoiding it with humor or avoiding it with, again, this argument that, well, it's truth is a point of view. It's not a point of view. We know that in our personal lives. Truth is truth.
Okay, thank you. There's another, and I was impressed by the Ford case that you have in your book, the Bold Moves campaign. Because there you have a concept like brand journalism that you were saying, and they turn kind of cynic people into advocates. I think it's always a delicate one when you have some people opposing your brand or opposing what you're doing. You have to react against it without becoming defensive. And I think that case from Ford was a very interesting one. So maybe if you can explain this one a little bit
Sure.
in detail.
Yeah, sure, and you're right, Ward, and it's a rich idea going forward. So this is back a couple of years ago. Ford and the other Detroit companies are kind of, halfway into the crapper. The experts don't believe they're building the right cars. This is before even the latest energy shock and before the economic meltdown, and pretty much whatever Ford does is going to be interpreted through that lens of, well, whatever they're doing, it's going to suck. And they're not sincere, but they're not doing the right thing. So one of their strategies was to literally invite in third-party journalists who were given, truthfully, free rein to, if you will, create documentaries on what Ford was doing to rebuild itself. And this took huge guts on the part of the brand, because again, brands normally think that the way you get at truth is you argue your side of a case, and that the way you get at truth is you convince people of what you believe is true, versus what Ford was doing, which was saying, we're going to bring in these third parties, literally give them access to the meetings where we're talking about our environmental responsibility, talking about the structure of our factory assembly lines, our design meetings. And it's not so much us persuading them that we're right or that we're smart. It's letting them see the reality of what we're trying to do and allowing them to communicate that reality to the outside world, so that the conclusion isn't that Ford is the best, the brightest, the sweetest, the most wonderful, whatever brand. It was Ford is truthfully working on this stuff, and they're doing it credibly, which was a great goal from a marketing perspective. And sure enough, that was the good news is that's actually what they were doing. So these little documentaries, and I think they're probably still on YouTube, came out and absolutely turned the tide even amongst their most vociferous, angry critics. Something similar happened a couple of years ago when Clorox was trying to come out with a new line of cleaning solvents. Now, Clorox makes bleach, which is, pretty much arsenic to the planet. I mean, it's poison. And what they did was, instead of coming out with a product, which they knew, by the way, would be absolutely, legitimately, truthfully much better for the planet, they reached out to the Sierra Club, which is a big advocacy group for environmental responsibility, and said, we're going to come out with this product, and you're not going to believe it, and you're going to attack it, and you're going to poo-poo it, because that's what you do. That's the kabuki drama. We do things, and then the Greek chorus complains. How about you come in on the front end, help us design it, watch the process, join us as a witness to what we're trying to do. And in fact, if we're successful, we'll even give you a cut of the profits, because you will have given us your good name to support our good cause. And the Sierra Club agreed. And Clorox came out with this line called Greenworks, which I think is now the category leader in environmentally responsible cleaning solvents, kitchen sprays and window cleaner and things like that. So that idea of not so much looking at truth or looking at branding as trying to present your point of view, but more of brands looking at what is the truth that everybody knows and that everybody relies on, and then figuring out creative ways to get the brand messaging into that conversation, not just as a declaration saying, well, here's what we think, but more of a tell us what you think about what we think, and in a meaningful way. In both those instances, by the way, both Ford and Clorox, this wasn't just inviting a group of bloggers in for a tour and then taking them out to lunch. This was actually giving people unscripted, real involvement in the processes in the business. And I think in both instances, I think Stu and I were just wildly impressed by the outcomes.
Yeah, very nice examples also of your story about the truth. Just on another level, Jonathan, I want to ask you something. I know that a lot of marketers have this as a daily issue or a daily problem. It's more in the promotional area than in the branding and the communications area. But I just want to ask your opinion about that, because we know that there's a lot of short-term pressure on all marketers. And we all see a lot of promotional plans, and they're full of price offs. Or some companies or some brands just go from one promotion to another one. And I, as a consumer, then I think, okay, how truthful is that brand? Because I bought it today at this price, and tomorrow it's just half price. So where is truth in this? And do you have a remedy, I would almost call it, to replace those promotions kind of things with something else? I know it's a very difficult, hard question, but loads of marketers are struggling with that day-to-day issue.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if I had the answer. You and I'd be having this conversation on my yacht. But let me give you a couple immediate thoughts on that, Ward. First, I agree there is a real challenge, especially in the retail world, and also especially in apparel as a subset. That there are a lot of retail brands, at least here in the States, where shoppers pretty much know that whatever the price tag says when the item is first put on the sales floor is not the real price. And there are actually, if there isn't already, there should be an iPhone app that calculates on average when a certain retail brand's pricing will get cut, because there's a system to it, and it's inevitable. And if you pay that initial price for that item, you're a fool. So we know that as consumers. That's the truth of retailing. So you're right. When they come up with the sale, we know they're getting somewhat closer to the real value, but usually even the first sale price, the first markdown isn't really there either. So the first challenge is, and the flip side is that price is absolutely truthful in terms of a motivator to buy. Think about it. I mean, if something's being marketed to me as X amount of dollars or pounds or euros or what have you, I don't necessarily have to buy the brand because of how I feel about it, because of how it makes me think about myself, because of it. I mean, price is actually objectively a great mechanism for determining truth, because they're digits. It's objective. It's a thing. It's money. So the challenge is how do you correlate those two realities? I think the challenge on staying true to your pricing on the former point that I made is I think you have to figure out how to be consistent in your overall pricing strategy, so that if you are doing a promo, and again, there's inherently nothing wrong with doing price promotions, you have to figure out how that stays consistent to the folks who just bought something for you a day prior for the full price, or are going to buy something from you the day after at full price, acknowledging that there's a continuum of a reality and of awareness amongst consumers, so that what might seem like a one-time event for you as a price promoter at the brand, for them is just this sort of blip in this ongoing continuum of their awareness of what you're doing and what you're communicating. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the price promo. It's how do we address it? And, you know, Apple's famous for not running any price promos. On the other hand, we have brands like Joseph Banks is a men's clothier here in the States. All they do is literally every day is a price promo. And today it's buy one, get one free. And then over the weekend, it'll be buy 5 shirts and get the second one for free. That's all they do. And I think in both those instances, I think they're misunderstanding this idea that you can use price promotion, but you have to be consistent. I would love if Brand X was running a price promotion that it automatically gave me a notification saying, we're going to give you X number of dollars back because you bought within the X day window and we acknowledge your business. And I think Amazon will even do that. If you place an order for a book and between the time you place the order and they ship, if the price goes down, they give you the lower price. It's that kind of consistency that I think would allow us as brand folks to use price promotions more effectively without denigrating the value of the brand. The flip side of that, though, is the other part of my point, which is price usually is a truth because it's taking the place of other truths that are missing. So if you can't come up with other truths for why people should buy your product, price is about the only one you're left with. So price is a stand-in for the real truths of your brand. So again, think of the Southwest Airlines example. You're buying those tickets, those cut rate tickets, based on, obviously it's a great price, but you're also buying it because of the truth of what they're offering. Now contrast that with how you might shop any other airline. They're all the same. There are no truths. The truth of, British Airways versus Berlin Air versus Ryanair, versus United or Continental or American Airlines, there are no truths. There is no basis to make those value judgments and those purchases. So what are you left with? Price. So so there's a way to do it if you're consistent, and flip side is you need to tell truths. Otherwise, all you're left with is selling at a discount.
I think that's a very interesting point. It's like if you don't have a real truth, then you use the price. So I think that's a very interesting one to think about, because that makes us think more about what is the real truth about the brand. So I think that's a very interesting point. Just one thing, Jonathan, I know that you have worked for Apple, and yes. Apple, for instance, talking about price, they are not doing any price promotions. Just want to know from you, is that part of their success, or is that?
Yeah. I don't know if it's a part of the success or if it's an outcome or it's a cause of part of the success, and perhaps both. I don't remember ever sitting in a meeting. I was around for the first iMac launch back in the late 1990s, and I was on the executive committee with Lee Clow, who's the Shy-Tay advertising guy, and with Steve Jobs and about 4 or 5 other people, Phil Schiller, the marketing guy, and I don't remember us ever sitting around talking about, we should hold the line on pricing. And I bet you if we went back and did research, I bet you Apple ran a whole bunch of price promos in the 80s and the 90s. So I don't know how Apple got to the point of being a no-sale store. But I do think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, just another, that's because we were a bit in the small questions about the promotional things, but I have also something like in shops you often see when product development has been working on a product improvement. For instance, the product has some more taste now, then you see those slogans are like more taste. I also read, I see you smiling already, because I know I read in your book also this is kind of not being truthful. But do you have then a solution? Because we do a lot of product improvements, we don't have always to relaunch or line extensions. Do you have a kind of recommendation how we can call those kind of things, or would you deal in another way with it?
Yeah, it drives me nuts. I worked at Gray Advertising early on in my career, and I remember we had a campaign for Joy dishwashing liquid. Though it was a detergent for the sink before people were using dishwashers a lot. And I remember the product benefit of the functional improvement was 14% more surfactant power. And I remember wondering, what the hell is a surfactant? And what does 14% more power get me over what I used to have? And if you think about the speeds and feed marketing that most technology people do, 4G, for instance, or you ever look at a flat screen TV lately and learn that your latency is 33 megahertz instead of 45 megahertz? Or your HDMI cable runs at gee whiz instead of oh wow speed? That's not truthful in terms of product attribute and product benefit. It's factual. It's honest. Those are technical realities. But our opportunity and our challenge as brand marketers is to take that knowledge, those facts, and make them relevant to consumer experience. So if 14% more surfactants in my dishwashing liquid means I could wash my dishes in half the time, or if it means I will kill 90% of the bacteria instead of 50% of the bacteria on my plates, which means my likelihood of my family getting sick, I'm making all this up, is reduced to zero. Our challenge as marketers and as truth tellers is to, and funny, I'm using those like in the same sentence, but it's what we have to be. If we either find the reality, the truthfulness of those functional stats, those factoids, or they don't belong in the advertising. Because right now we're hoping people are dumb enough to go, oh, I want the fast one. I want them 14% more surfactants. Well, geez, 14%, that's great. That's almost a fifth. That's wonderful. People were never that dumb, but they certainly aren't that dumb now. Because all I have to do is punch online, and I can check, and I can realize, wow, the difference between 15% more surfactants and 90% more is nothing. Because you reach a threshold, and after that, it just cleans all the same. In fact, so I can get the truth. So the challenge for us is to take those facts and relate them to the truth of people's lives. How does it actually make them better or different? And if it doesn't, so in other words, so Monster Cable for years has been selling cables that hook up stereo equipment and making a big deal out of the fact that some of their component cables are gold tipped, and therefore you should pay 3 times the amount of money for that plug instead of the regular ones. That is such old-fashioned marketing and branding. Again, they're not bad guys. It's not dishonest. The opposite in our whole premise in the book, Ward, is not that the opposite of truth is falsehood. The opposite of truth is simply the lack of truth. It's empty calories of communication. And you don't build a sustainable brand based on tricking or fooling customers or playing to their biases. So that's where I am on the.
Good, thanks. Interesting, very interesting. Something out of the book again. You're talking about truth turning points, where you said that the moments where people get in touch with something that it's sometimes even more important than the content of the truth. And you also had some 6 ways to create truth turning points, which you were talking about. Maybe I think it's interesting, apart from truth, to talk about those moments. Maybe if you just could elaborate on 2 of the most compelling ones or something, but just elaborate a bit on that if you can.
Sure. Well, and it's funny because we're in a political campaign here in the States for president, and there's a saying that says when politicians make gaffes, that's when they're actually telling you the truth. So when they leave the mic on when the politician thinks it's off and they say something, usually it's the truth, and usually it's news because it's not what they were willing to say when they were officially doing the branding. And it's the same thing for businesses. So the corollary for businesses and for brands is when something goes wrong, we learn the truth of the brand. A plane crashes, a product fails, the service guy doesn't show up. So and we've talked a lot as marketers about the need to be responsive and the need to address these things and how quickly and how adequately you address these shortcomings and these gaffes, the better off your brand will be, which is absolutely true. Well, Sue and I were looking at these businesses and we decided, well, wait a minute, why is this just a crisis thing? Why are we just waiting for something to go wrong and then hoping we address it correctly? Couldn't it actually be a proactive strategy so that actually breaking through the clutter wasn't just a creative, funny, sexy challenge, but it was also a truth-telling challenge? And so, for instance, would be, simply when, again, back to Apple, and I'm sorry to use Apple's so much because it's so easy to use Apple because they do so many things right, not everything right, by the way. When they were coming out, when Jobs was still alive, and he came out with the announcement for iCloud. One of the first words that came out of his mouth to the press conference was that we did Mobile Me, and as you know, it really wasn't much of a success. And for those of you out there who use Apple, I was an early Mobile Me user. It was kludgy. It was a great idea, but it was far from perfect. And he acknowledged it. It was like he looked over and saw the 800-pound gorilla sitting next to him on the table, and he said, FYI, I know that's there, and that's why we've done X. It wasn't a crisis. Nobody had a gun to his head. He didn't have to. There was no product problem. He was simply telling us the truth about what they were doing. Now imagine if Microsoft had done that when they came out with Windows 7 and said, hey, guess what? We weren't happy with Vista either. And that's why we improved it the following ways. Instead of the cute smarty pants marketing they came out with saying, these little vignettes of actors and actresses claiming to have designed components of the OS, which of course is not true. So in a proactive way, though, to be able to look at those sort of opportunities and say, where are there chances for us to talk about a truth about our brand that is actually good news, that is actually an opportunity, that we've actually done something special or done something different, and we're just truthfully proud and happy about it. We think that we too easily think about truthfulness as simply being something that is a crisis reveals versus everyday marketing should reveal. So I would love, and I truthfully, I'm at pains to come up with a good example in the last at least a week or a couple of weeks of a brand that literally told me something I didn't already know about the brand, and they did it voluntarily, and they did it because it was a positive. I'd love to hear more, and I guarantee you, any brand's Facebook page, love to have a post that it would be shared up on Zoo if it said something truthful and cool about the brand that was positive. I don't know why businesses don't.
Okay, thank you. There was also a quote that you took from, I think, a vice president from GlaxoSmithKline with regards to the Tums brand in the US, where he said, and I will just read it straight away. He said, "We'd become obsessed with what others were doing and not focused on what was authentically true about the brand." Is that not one of the biggest lessons from your book also, that we are too much looking to our competitors and therefore not looking at ourselves to know what we are about? Is that not something that is very at the basis of your book?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. It's a great point that you make, Ward, because again, as marketers and as brand strategists, we look at the marketplace like a sports captain might look at his or her football team, and we look at the landscape of the fit playing field, and we look at the different positions and find the opportunity for the play or the player and say that's where we need to fit. And then they try to construct the argument for why they fit right there. And the Tums example, the quote, and she's a smart marketer, says, actually, be who you are, do what you do really well, and that truth will emerge in the marketplace as your position and the position that you can own, versus trying to cater to what you think the opportunity is and perhaps be something you're not. It's a radical different way of looking at it. Again, I hate to come back to Apple, but Apple's just Apple. And you could argue that they've done so many things wrong and so many things like, where the hell did they come up with that? I mean, I remember when iPad came out and the whole comment was, who the hell needs it and what are you going to do with it? And they shrugged and said, the world will figure it out. We thought it was a good thing to do. Obviously, they thought about it a bit more than that, but not much. So this idea that we are marketers are just so smart and we're these wizards that we're going to craft these positions that people are going to believe and obey, I don't know if those days ever existed, but they're certainly over now. And the Tums example is a great one, which is, this is how it works. And if you don't like it, consumer, you're allowed to say no.
Okay, in relation to this, I also have another question.
Sure.
What's the role of top management in all of this? Because we know that they have very short-term market objectives and turnover objectives. And I know, for instance, from also from business, if you have Nielsen analysis, we all know Nielsen, who is doing the market research and who is evaluating your position in the market. As soon as your brand is a little bit down in market share, top management is reacting and asking to markets, okay, what you got to do about it? And then they go into the short term, and then they look at the competition. And is that not also part of the problem? What's your view on top management in your story?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I can't speak for Sue on this point because we don't address it that explicitly in the book. But my opinion on it, Ward, is actually, again, I come back to we marketers and we brand folks are our own worst enemies. You know, we preach this theology that the business should invest money in this thing. It's a thing, by the way, called the brand, and that it's going to return value. And interestingly enough, when sales are good, we say it's a great brand. And when sales are bad, we say you can't hold the brand responsible. That's not fair. The brand is bigger and more than that. So in other words, we want to have our cake and we want to eat it too. And getting back to the book, what we really tried to do is provide marketers with a set of tools, a toolkit, so that we could define the brand in more immediately actionable ways, so that we're not busy making a theological case for why the brand has value and looking for a magical proof of it sort of in the ether. Because guess what? Really good brands sell really well. You don't need a great brand that can't sell products. So this idea that the operators of the business have unreasonable expectations of how the business is going to perform, they're actually not idiots. They're like smart people. They just speak a different language than we marketers. So the challenge and the opportunity for us is to take a book like ours, which we did actual checklists after every chapter of how you can apply these ideas of truth to your business, and try to find a way to more integrate how we go about articulating and delivering the brand so that it fits into that expectation on the operator side. So when sales falter, our response isn't, well, that's not the brand's fault, or you have to invest in the long term. Our response is, oh, well, we have 5 things we can do that are on brand and that are truthful, that we can address that, because that's going to be a part of reality. So I see it as an opportunity to really come together. This idea that we marketers it's 2012 and we're still feeling underappreciated and misunderstood in the boardroom is stupid.
Okay, thank you. Another one, I think we're getting to the end of our webinar, but also sometimes I'm falling over words and things. But I read in your book that brands should encourage conversation. That's what we all know. That's also the social media area that we have to get into those conversations. But you say they should less with itself, but more about itself. So about the brands. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because sure. I had to reread it, to be honest, to just get it.
Well, and it could be a link. And my degree is in poetry. So
no, that's interesting.
So I think one of the things that we're still in the early days of digital and social, but I think we are mistaken if we think that consumers want to talk to brands. One, nobody wakes up wanting to have a conversation with their toothpaste. And secondly, consumers aren't dumb. They know that brands aren't things. We talk about brands like they exist, but they don't. Brands are the creation of people. And behind every artifact of branding is a person or people who created it and who support it or who are trying to run away from it. So this idea that the mechanism of peer-to-peer, P2P communication is consumers wanting to talk to brands is a fallacy. They don't. What they're doing is they're talking about brands. They're talking about what the brands produce and what the brands do. And that's where they're finding things like referral and authority and comfort and adoption and usage and what have you. It's not these artificial voices, however funny and quirky they might be, of the brand talking to the customer on the other end of the tube. It's people talking about brands. So the challenge for brands is not to try to control that conversation, or for that matter, even pretend like it's one of the guys. And hey, yeah, we make clean tissues, and we're a part of the conversation. Actually, no, you're not. You're the topic of the conversation. There's a great line in the movie Blade Runner. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but where this, Harrison Ford is chasing these robots who look like humans, and he falls in love with one of them, and he's supposed to shoot her, and he doesn't want to shoot her, and so he decides to let her go, and he says, I nothing personal, it's just business. And she says, no, I am the business. And it's similar for the brands. I don't think brands need to have conversations. Brands need to populate conversations with the stuff upon which conversations are made. Meaningful, good, useful stuff.
Good, thank you. Jonathan, something else. I know you have trademarked the line "brand is behavior."
Yes, I own it.
Oh, yes, I see enthusiasm. Can you just explain a bit more about it? Because I like that one.
Yeah, it's something I've been really researching for a long time, and I first floated in my first book, Branding Only Works in Cattle, in 2008. And that was this idea that in this day and age, we can talk about people's intentions all we want, and we can talk about feelings and associative values and emotional components, and for that matter, brain firing. Ultimately, the measure of whether or not your brand is a success is whether people buy things. And I know that's uncomfortable, but it is ultimately the only thing that really matters. And there have been any number of great brands. I think in 2008, I wrote about how, Sony is such a well-known brand name that kids are named Sony in the world when they're born. But what is that doing for their sales? Not necessarily that much. So this idea that brand is behavior is something I've been advocating, which is unless people are doing things because of your branding, because of the truthfulness of your brand, they're not doing things. You're really in this world of what if. You're in this world of potentiality in terms of actuality. So our challenge as marketers is how do we translate all those hopes and aspirations for our branding into specific actionable moments that are real for consumers, so that the brand really is behavior. It's a verb. It's why and how people do things versus what they think and talk about.
Interesting, thank you. I think we're getting to the end, Jonathan, of a very interesting webinar. Thank you for that. But just one last question. Sure. I still have two questions. The last,
I'll be short.
Sorry?
I'll be quick.
No. The one I have now is based on the book, so I got to show your book again to our viewers. So this book, what is if you say, like for instance, you're saying in the book about your brand, you can only tell one truth. If I ask you about your book, if you just can give one advice to our viewers and listeners, what would be that advice?
It would be pretty blunt and brutal, and it would be look at any artifact of your marketing strategy, any component, any tactic, any big idea, small idea, and ask yourself a simple question. If I didn't do this, would my consumers miss it? And if the answer is yes, then you need to do it, and maybe you need to do more of it. And if the answer is no, or I don't know, that is your immediate key trigger to start asking yourself some other difficult questions of why isn't it something they need to know? And why isn't it something that they'd miss? Because we all have enough in our lives in terms of wonderful, hilarious entertainment. I got enough of it. I got a long list of things I'm supposed to click on. I only click on the stuff that I actually need or want. So that sort of litmus test is actually a test of truthfulness.
Okay. Good, thank you. So for the book, my last question, Jonathan, is I've also read Branding Only Works on Cattle, so I'm very interested in what you are writing. So, of course, the last question is, are you working on a next book, and what would that next book be about?
Yeah, I am, and the next book tentatively is about the various big ideas of the 20th century having been invented by actually marketers and visionary communicators. So this whole idea of good, better, best in terms of how we buy things, our presumption that tomorrow we'll be able to achieve things that we couldn't achieve today, the whole idea of social mobility, PR campaigns, mass movements, mass media movements, all these things that happened in the 20th century that we kind of presume were just sort of givens in life were in fact created by really smart, visionary, sometimes evil people, but mostly visionary people. And so my book is about what they were, how they were an exception to history, and how in many ways what we're doing now in the 21st century much more resembles the way we lived and communicated back in the 19th century. And what that might mean for us, not only as communicators and marketers, but also in terms of thinking as citizens, thinking as family members, how our lives are more like 1812 than 1912.
Great. So something to look forward at. For when is that book planned, Jonathan?
Tentatively spring of 2014, but that does presume I've written it first, so we'll see.
Okay, looking forward to that. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we are close to the end of this webinar. First of all, Jonathan, I want to thank you very much. Thought it was very interesting and a very eye-opener for all of us and for all marketers that have been watching this. So we also look forward to the interaction you might have with our members in the forum of Expert Marketeer on your book.
Absolutely.
To our viewers and listeners, thank you for being there, and we hope you got some inspiring ideas from Jonathan and his book. Like you know, we are planning several webinars. I would just say check in on our website to see what's coming up next. But I can already tell you now, the next one is also a very interesting webinar that we are planning in June, and that's with Harry McDivitt, and specifically on value-based pricing. So it will be a webinar on the subject of pricing, and in July we will have a webinar on sports marketing because there's the Olympic Games in London. So that are the two that are planned, but just watch out on our website to get more details about it. Okay, again, thank you all very much, and Jonathan, see you, talk to you, bye-bye, and thank you very much.
Absolutely. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.